In chapter 12, you learn about chemical bondings, and that there are two types of chemical bonds: ionic bonds and covalent bonds. Ionic bonds make up a formula units, and covalent bonds are make the molecules. We use sodium chloride as an example of formula unit because sodium chloride is formed by the ionic bonds between sodium and chloride, whereas the water molecules is formed by covalent bonds between oxygen and two hydrogen. So in this chapter, you will learn about language of chemistry. There are three topics you will learn in this chapter. Each of these topics, there is a lecture video associated with this. So please watch the YouTube lecture video. I include the link of YouTube video in the presentation. The first topic you will learn in this chapter is how you classify the chemical compounds. And then you will learn how to classify ions. Remember in the previous chapter we talked about cations, which carry a positive charge, and anions would carry a negative charge, or they are negatively charged. So you want to classify them. Last of all, you will learn how to write the chemical formulas and naming compounds. Now, in the first six chapter, you learn in this semester, you just accept the chemical formula. If I told you a chemical formula water is H2O and you just accept it, now you will learn how to write a chemical formula, and you also learn how to name it. So let's talk about classification of compounds. Most inorganic compounds do not contain element carbon. It's symbol C, with the exception of carbon dioxide, CO2, and carbonate ion would contain one carbon, three oxygen, with a charge of 2 minus. So when I talk about classification of compound in this chapter, I only focus on inorganic compounds and acid. So within this category, there are three types of compound. There's ionic compounds, molecular compounds, and aqueous acid. Within the ionic category, there are two types of ionic compound: the binary ionic compound and ternary ionic compound. For the molecular compound, there's a one type, and it's binary molecular compound. In the category of aqueous acid, you will see there is a binary acid and ternary oxy acid. What are the differences among these compounds? So let's first talk about ionic compound. So there are two types of ionic compound: the binary ionic compound and ternary ionic compound. For the ionic compound, let's recall it made by electron transfer between a metal and a non-metal. So first you need to recognize it's an ionic compound before you can determine it's a binary or ternary, right? So make sure you know that ionic compound only contain a metal and a non-metal. For the binary ionic compounds, they contain two elements, one metal and one non-metal. An example of binary ionic compounds is sodium chloride. You see sodium chloride NaCl, it contains two elements. The first element is sodium, Na. The second element is chlorine, Cl. So we call this is we group it into a binary ionic compound because sodium chloride NaCl contains two elements. Another example of a binary ionic compound is aluminum chloride. The first element of aluminum chloride is aluminum. The second element in aluminum chloride compound is chloride ion. Because this compound contains one metal, aluminum, and one non-metal, a chloride ion, is grouped into binary ionic compound. Now, how about for ternary ionic compound? When you see the prefix you know 3. That means it contains 3 elements. At least one of the elements is a metal, and one is a non-metal. Example of ternary ionic compounds are potassium nitrate or aluminum nitrate. You see potassium nitrate, it contains potassium, K, nitrogen, and oxygen. So there are 3 elements, K and O. Therefore, it is grouped into ternary ionic compounds, or we call potassium nitrate, or we say potassium nitrate is a ternary ionic compound. So there are 2 types of ionic compounds, binary ionic compounds and ternary ionic compound. It depends on how many elements make up these compounds. Because they are ionic, they always have to contain at least one metal, and the other elements are non-metals. The next type the second type of inorganic compound is molecular compound. In the molecular compound, you only see the binary molecular compound. What does it mean? Just like binary ionic compound, when you see the word, the prefix bi, you know that it contains two elements. And because it's the molecular compounds which are formed by the covalent bonds or electron sharing between nonmetals, the binary molecular compounds are both the element that in the binary molecular compounds, they both are nonmetals. For example, ammonia, water. Ammonia contains 2 elements, nitrogen and hydrogen, and therefore we call it binary molecular compound. Water. The first element in water is hydrogen, the second element in water is oxygen, and therefore we call it a binary molecular compound. The last group in inorganic compound, we call it aqueous acid. Aqueous means in solution, in liquid. There are 2 types of aqueous acid, the binary acid and ternary oxy acid. So a binary acid, just like we talk about binary ionic compound, binary molecular compound, bi means 2, and therefore in these acids, it contains 2 elements. And the first element is always hydrogen and a nonmetal. The formula of an acid is always begin with hydrogen or H. For example, HCl, HBr, HF. So you see, this binary acid contains 2 elements. Hydrogen is always the first element, and then another non-metal like chlorine. The second one is bromine or fluorine. For ternary oxy acid, there are 2 things in here. The third, that means 3. Oxy means it contains oxygen. So ternary oxy acid, they are aqueous solution of a compound that contain hydrogen, because an acid, it contains hydrogen, and an oxy anion. Oxy anion means an ion that has oxygen. So for example, HClO3, H2SO4, H2CO3. I'm not saying the name now because you will learn how to name them at the end of this chapter. And sometimes for aqueous, they abbreviate AQ, meaning in a solution. For the next topic, classification, you will see a detailed YouTube video lecture I record for just for classification of iron. But before that, I want to go over what type of ions, or recall you what type of ions you have learned before this lecture. So you learned that there are cation ions with they are positively charged. You can usually see a plus sign, and anions. They are negatively charged, and usually they carry a the minus sign. Remember, we talked about sodium ion Na plus, and we talked about chloride ion Cl minus. So Na plus is a cation ions, and Cl minus is an anion. Now within the cation ions, there are two types of cations: the monoatomic cations and polyatomic cations. Likewise, within the anions, you have monoatomic anions and polyatomic anions. Mono means one, so monoatomic means one atom and to form that ions, or that ions only contain one atoms. Polyatomic, poly means multiple, more than one, and therefore polyatomic ions are ions that contain more than one atom. For example, ammonium ion. You can see this this cation contains two elements, more than one atom, the nitrogen element and 4 hydrogen. So together it's 5 atoms. Likewise for the monoatomic anions. Monoatomic anions are ions only contain one atom. For example, N minus, nitride ion. For the polyatomic anions, these are ions that contain more than one atom. For example, NO3 minus, nitrate ion. This ion contains a total of 4 atoms from 2 different elements, nitrogen and oxygen. So 1 nitrogen and 3 oxygen. So I'm going to stop here, and then you will watch another YouTube video on in detail how you classify the type of ion.